Okay, so Karen, so let's move into um, talk before we get into the nitty-gritty of the book. And we couldn't even begin to scratch the surface.
Yeah.
But are there main from your all the research, are there main teacher takeaways from this extraordinary wealth of information that you would want voice teachers to know?
Okay, well, I want to just step back one step. What I really want people to know that are listening tonight is that I am not an academic per se. I do teach at Northwestern University, and I have for 26 years, and I taught at Concordia University before that, from the time I was 26. But I am not one of those high degree teachers who's gotten their doctorate or their PhD, or I didn't even finish my master's. So learning to research and learning to what I did about the voice started first from my own point of view as a singer and a mother and a teacher who was working with 8-year-olds and also at the same time working with 70-year-olds. And it's always just been a very organic part of my life. And yes, I do teach classical voice at Northwestern. That is the main thing that I do. But I want people to know that came first, and then came the learning to research. So if I can do it, you can do it.
Mhm.
And it became, I didn't even know that part of me. The biggest thing that really blew my mind, so in particular about children, is everything about that instrument is different. The tissues are different, the cartilages are different, the bones are different, or they're not bone yet. The the mouth is literally, there is not much of a back of the throat at all. The pharynx is very small. The tongue is basically completely in the mouth, and the epiglottis is touching the velum. And if you can, I remember reading that and picturing it and going, what? But
Mhm.
that's how they can nurse and
Mhm.
breathe at the same time. And then how they swallow, that helps develop things too, having to do with the voice. And, they say you should not suck your thumb, you should be breastfed because it actually works the whole entire vocal tract more and all the muscles. And that just intrigued me. And then you go on through life. So you can talk about the vocal tract and how it changes. You can talk about the how the ribs are shaped. They're kind of like they're sort of this way as a baby, and when you get older, they're more like this. And that change takes place, even thinking back at the vertebrae, that the torsion of that they torque a little differently from the vertebrae itself, and that your vocal folds are a single kind of cell at the beginning that's pretty just gel-like, and it takes the entire until puberty before you have all 3 layers of the lamina propria and the thyroarytenoid is fully formed as a muscle. Even then, they keep changing, so this is a constantly changing, living musical instrument. And I could talk also about hyaluronic acid. We have that throughout our bodies, and it's very affected by if you're a baby and you have a ton of it, and then you can cry and cry and cry. And you actually need to cry because it's that very stress of crying, and not stress like we talk about being stressed out, but using muscles and the whole entire apparatus so that that causes tissues to change. It causes muscles to get stronger. It changes how you breathe. As a baby, your abdominal muscles are very, very weak, and you actually do use diaphragmatic breathing at first.
Mhm.
And so it's such that very different from how you're going to breathe as a child later on, not that long from then too. So
Mhm.
that's what to know about the child voice and
Mhm.
how it is changing constantly. When you're born, you have about 20 million alveoli, which are those little sacs at the ends of the bronchioles that exchange the gases. If you were a really, really tall guy, then at 6'7", you might, as an adult, have 750 million alveoli. So there's a lot of new cells coming in and changes in tissue. Your little muscles of breathing when you're a baby can't do their work, but as you cry, it kind of gets them to do that. And um, it's an amazing process that we go through, and that this is a musical instrument. So
Yes, absolutely. And let's stick with the children aspect for just a moment. On page 51, you say the nurtured child singer is capable of developing greater range, flexibility, endurance, and interpretive excellence. And so, based on your research, what insight do you have about the age-old question of voice lessons for children, right? You discuss it on page 45 as well.
mhm.
But what is your input in that ongoing debate still?
If you know children's voices, and not just their voices, but as much as you can about them, I'm all for it. I think it's why not? And I will. Here we can go to England and look at, go to Germany and look at the Thomaner Chor. It's a boy choir, and that's Bach's church in Leipzig. And there is a man there who was in the Thomaner Chor, and after he graduated, he eventually became an otolaryngologist and a voice scientist. His name is Michael Fuchs, Fuchs, and I do cite him in the book, and I really, really, really want to meet him. But he talks about that children their range isn't necessarily going to go down much at all because it just can't because of their age, but the range can go up quite a bit with training and proper training, making sure that it's appropriate for their age as far as aerodynamics go. And there's a film that I also talk about in the book, and that is of the Thomaner Chor, and they have a little boy coming in at 7 years of age, and Herr Biller, who was the director then, warms him up, this child up to a high, high, high A flat, and it's piece of cake. Then another little boy comes in and he warms him up to a high C, above high C. So this is possible. That doesn't mean everybody should go for that, and it doesn't mean that in those children's voices it doesn't go away because their vocal tract is growing. And as the larynx goes down, the pitch starts to be a little lower too. Yeah, the fundamental tends to be a little lower also. So, but Dr. Fuchs says that it's only with training that this kind of thing can happen in a child's voice. And I'm speaking from a classical perspective. I have questions about, I have no answer for whether or not a child singing a lot of chest voice kind of production is good or bad for them. But I'll tell you this, I sang a ton of chest voice as a kid. I
Hmm.
was so loud, and I don't know, that maybe helped me. I think we need more research on that, but it sure is fun to have the question.
And it's, don't you think it's individual to some degree? I mean,
Absolutely.
there are some truths, but there is also individuality. Just like why would one person get tendonitis doing a sport activity and somebody
Yeah.
else? There can be maybe your vocal folds will built in such a way that it just didn't impact you. And
Right. And I can still be loud and I don't get tired. So, but somebody else does. So who am I to say? I like it all. I think it's
that
great.
served you well for sure, for all of us, right? I mean, that are teachers and singers that served us well. Let's move towards the adolescent voice a bit. And in particular, page 64, 65, you discuss respiration during this time of adolescence. And I don't know if you just have some broad strokes. You don't need to necessarily go to that page. I know you discuss it. That's that section on respiration.
Okay,
Um,
well, real quickly, we know that the hormones kick in, and we know that that stimulates sudden growth, a lot of growth real fast. The hormones have been laying dormant for a while, and that for some reason at that point they are kicked in. For women, it's going to be their estrogen and progesterone, and for men, it's the testosterone. We all have each other's a little bit too, but that's basically how it goes. And there is, within that, there are the Tanner stages of change in the voice, which goes in a particular order they have found, but not the times for each of those stages. The Tanner stages is different from child to child. And an interesting thing about that is, I'll just put in about the Harpenden orphanage, where John Tanner went there for, I think it was 24 years, and he measured like 55 men and 33 children, not men, children, 55 male and 33 female or something like that, and um, took measurements of their legs at different places of them sitting, and when did their chest get bigger, get taller, all of that. And also watching how the sexual differences in genitalia progress too. This wouldn't happen today, you know, so it's very interesting. But the important thing is that John Cooksey saw a complete correlation between those changes and when the voice changes happen, uh, stages of that within the adolescent voice. So that's, I have a chart in there of both comparing the Tanner to the Cooksey for both male with John Cooksey, but then it's with with women then after that too. And so that is an interesting too. And that's Lynn Gackle who did that. And she is president-elect of ACDA right now. So she was groundbreaking and all of that. As far as breathing, Chadley really taught me this because what it took for them to talk or sing or yell as a child, all of a sudden, for instance, especially in guys who are actually they're growing faster and bigger in all ways, all of a sudden they will yell and nothing comes out because the strategies they're using to support aren't the same. They're going to change. As a child, their vocal folds, 1/3 of it, or 1/2 of it was membrane, and then the back half of it was cartilage. That changes to 2/3 is membrane and 1/3 is cartilage. And therefore, the child was under a more a lot of air pushed towards it. That is not needed as much as they go through. And so they actually have to change their strategies going through it. What worked once as a child isn't necessarily going to work for a boy, for instance, and especially in boys. And they do say for boys also that going through adolescence, there's a greater chance of boys choking. And that has to do with the irregular growth that's happening. You don't grow at the same time all the time. If you did, you can imagine as a baby, your head is about 1/3 or 1/4 of you. And if you just kept growing, can you imagine how big our heads would be? That's not how it goes. So some things that grow long, which is called somatic growth, that grows faster and for a shorter period of time. Neural growth, which goes around, would be on the horizontal plane. That happens slower. And this happens within the vocal folds, within the vocal cartilage itself, within our bones of our support, within our vocal tract. Just want to give a shout out to Vorparian. Huri Vorparian is a scientist at the University of Wisconsin, and what she wrote about all the measurements that she and her team had taken of the vocal tract from age 0 to age 93 just blew my mind. First, she did it from 0 to 19, and it would be 9 different measurements, you know, both going in the vertical tract from here to here or here to here, but then it might be in the horizontal tract, like, you know, at the back, where did it grow? Right here at the alveolar ridge, how did it grow? So, and I want Chadley's here. I know he is. So let's bring him in.
On now, okay.
Yeah.
Let's bring you on now. Hello, thank you for welcome, Chadley Ballantyne.
Hey. So Chadley is a cool guy, and I was so tickled that he agreed to write in the adolescent chapter and other places in the book too. And I learned so much from you, and I know anybody who's gone to anything he's presented has too. And he really taught me so much. But I wanted him to come today and talk about, he has an exercise called the weird exercise, but he draws at the end of the chapter in adolescence. I have 4 or 5, maybe it's 6 people that talk about how they have worked with adolescents. One of those was the teacher of this Norwegian boy who sings, and he's like an angel, and Axel Rikvin, and he was a guest at the winter workshop in New York City. But we got to hear him at ICVT also, and we heard him before the change And then he got right up on stage and he sang after the change of voice. So, and so let's talk about that, but I do want to make sure I talk about Brown and Benke too after Chadley.
Yes, I'll bring us back to that. Thank you.
Great.
Chadley, do you want to take us, and let me just do a plug for later in the season, Chadley and Kari Obert will be on as my guests as well. And we're going to talk about CCM and twang a little bit, right? Some research that you both have going on around that subject. So I'm eager for that. But tonight, do you want to just do a little of the Chadley's weird exercise?
Sure. So it got this name from, I love working with different language sounds to leverage vocal acoustics. When we look at the spectrum and we're looking at it as the observer, a lot of times we'll say the formant, those patterns of formants define the vowel. But when it's the person creating the sound, it's actually the reverse. Their intended vowel defined or moved the formants to that position. So I'm always looking for like silly combinations to create predictable outcomes to leverage vocal acoustic things. And I'd been looking for a way to help people get into the kind of second formant tuning needed for mixed belt and for singing in the treble staff range in classical singing, and just all kinds of things to help them use their articulation better and find the best resonance setups better. And I stumbled upon the the use of the sound of R, because all the time when I was reading, I would see, oh, the first and second formants are movable and the rest of the formants are fixed. And then one day I was getting ready to go teach all my high schoolers, and I happened to see a journal article that said the third formant is moved by the sound R. And when I got into school and tried that out, it moves a lot when you say R. There are about 5 languages in the world that feature a retroflex R. The Midwest is where I'm from originally, is definitely one of them. So I started playing around with that and seeing what I could do with it. And I noticed that it helped overtone singing. And I happened to have a whole bunch of high schoolers that day who needed help with their overtone singing. And then I was just playing around with using combinations of E and R and ah, and I found that I could help sopranos and mezzos figure out how to sing a nice, well-supported, clear ah vowel in the range of the treble staff, and that I was helping my musical theater tenors at the time sing with ease and clarity and power up above their passaggio, and I was having a lot of fun with it. So I presented this idea in a like a little teaching workshop at Northwestern for Karen, and Karen got a kick out of the exercise, and I started getting messages from my friends who study with her later in that month saying, "Hey, I had this awesome lesson today. I hear I'm supposed to send you a thank you." And so Karen called it came up with the title of the weird exercise, because the main syllable that I started using, or the like combination I started using, was weir-ah, which kind of sounds like weird, and it's a really effective way to set up several things. It gets the articulators moving. You can use the eval either roughly around B3 for lower singers or B4 for treble singers to develop a lot of easy efficiency and power. Then the R temporarily brings a lot of the formants 1, 2, and 3 pretty close to each other. And then we release to the ah. A lot of times they've discovered a much better ah vowel that is really difficult to teach, that it leads them into it pretty quickly. And it's really effective for young singers and more experienced singers, and it works really well in both classical and CCM training. And as I started presenting about it, I started meeting like one person or maybe 2 people at each event who was like, "Oh, I thought I was the only one," or "My teacher taught that. I've never heard anybody else talk about that. That's so cool that you figured out how it works." So I feel like there's this little untold story about using retroflex R in teaching teaching people how to sing in the treble staff range that needs to be told. But that's basically the idea behind the exercise. But you're using E to get a head start or a running start at it, and then R, a real and then releasing to ah or whatever your next vowel is.
Can you demonstrate it?
Sure. So this is going to be roughly around middle C. I don't have a piano next to me right now, but so I would hold a tone on we, and then go to R, then ah. So we or if I was in a song and I wanted to set up the first word, so say the first word was, or the first couple of words were I love you, I love you. So that's kind of how I applied it. And it helped my CCM singers with their mixed belt, and it helped my classical singers with that second formant tuning that they need for singing in the treble staff range.
And what I found it did was I would use it with students, especially like around D, E flat, E, F, F sharp, above middle C and G. And it really, really helped. The mezzo-sopranos really benefited from that, anybody who needs to figure out which voice to use or how to get through that part of the voice. It helped me, so heck with them.
I know I've heard you present on it a couple times at PAVA and some maybe just in private conversations, and it's just fascinating. And you have, especially in your poster paper, you have great detail about how it's the formants and what's going on. And so it's more than just a weird exercise. You actually have some evidence to support your findings.
And I think the important part to keep in mind when you're tackling vocal acoustics is that when it comes to the singer, the formants, the pattern and the dispersion of the formants, all those things we're trying to work with, they're controlled by the vowels, rather than saying, ooh, I've got an ah vowel and I want to move the formants. That's not very easy to do. But if you're like, oh, the formants are here and I need them to be kind of here, or I want to move them a little bit or figure out how to work with them better, like, well, you can string together different language sounds to really get them in motion. And I'm playing around with now, like figuring out ways to make it simple to move the fourth formant around, which does not sound like a language sound yet, but it's very distinctive.
And let me throw something in here, which is jumps ahead. It's actually, I think, in the adult chapter of the book. But in doing this kind of stuff, the format tuning, can we say it's that? But it is minute little changes in the vocal tract, and that is an art. And there was an article that I read that said that, for instance, if you're a chorus kind of singer primarily, or in college, let's say, you're doing it at a certain level, and they have put electrodes on and seen what the brain activity is for all of this too. And then, let's just say that then you're singing at a higher, let's call it a higher, more sophisticated level, whether it be CCM or whether it be classical music. Actually, there's more interactivity of the both sides of the brain. And those people who are really, really the stars, there really is an different brain activity going on that is more synaptic or something, whatever the word is. It really, this is an intelligence that people are figuring out, and you don't really know specifically that you're doing it. And I know Chadley's also getting into a lot of kinesthesia and that kind of stuff too, and how our thinking affects our singing. But that'd take another 2 hours. So
yes.
Was there a particular case study that you wanted Chadley to share from the book?
So I believe he's listed as Jason. I, of course, changed the names of all the case studies in the chapter. But he was pretty. I related to his experience a lot, and he was kind of a really like a great example of what a lot of students were going through in their 8th grade year. So around 13, 14, for the male students who had just gone through their voice change. One of the things that kind of came out in our research was a study that looked at what memories people had of their voice change. I'm forgetting her name off the top of my head, but it's there. It's cited there in the chapter, and they found that most people had like one or two kind of traumatic memories of their voice change, but not a memory of the general voice of the entire process.
Right.
They didn't really remember before and after. There was just a day that something happened that they could never forget. And for me, that event was in 7th grade, the first time I experienced what Ken Bozeman has called close timbre, where I went from open timbre to close timbre. And that doesn't really stand out before the voice change because the voice sits higher and there's not quite as much interaction or awareness of all these things happening. But then all of a sudden your voice drops way down into the basement in 7th grade like mine did. And all of a sudden there are all these new acoustic registration things happening and they vibrate way more and you feel them way more intensely. And I was sitting in the back of the choir in Harold Hall in Lamoni, Iowa. It was a sunny day. This is how strong this memory is. And, and it was in the middle of the afternoon, and I sang something like "ah ooh," and that shift from an open timbre to a closed timbre, where the second harmonic went above the first formant, I jumped and I thought I'd done something terribly wrong. And I thought, well, that can't be right. I will figure out how to never let that happen again. And I wish I could go back and tell 7th grade me, like, no, 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 that was right.
Yeah.
Do that a lot. So Jason had not taken lessons with me before his voice changed, but his voice changed over the summer, and he was a pretty talented young singer, and he was having a little bit trouble matching pitch after his voice changed, and his range had dropped down to about it was about G2 to G3, which is pretty normal for that age group, where right after the voice change, that new baritone stage where there's not much. And like a lot of young kids, when I would introduce like Voce Vista video or ideas about acoustics, they were really interested in it. They wanted to know, like, they've got this cool new instrument that they're not sure how to control, and they're not sure if it's right or what they sound like, but they would love to know how to use it. And I found that with Jason and a lot of other students, that I should never underestimate what they can pick up as long as I can give it to them in a way that they can experience it in their own voice and see what happens when they say this and that happens, what they feel, they can really pick up some concepts that, for me as a doctoral student, when I started working with this, took me forever to figure out. So one of the first things I would do with these young eighth grade baritones whose voices had just dropped into the basement was teach them how to go through that acoustic turn that I had experienced as a 7th grader, going from open to closed timbre, to help set them up so that they could start breaking free of the larynx, tracking up with the pitch, and start experiencing these other timbres in their head. And Jason was kind of typical of a lot of students that the first time he felt that ah ooh instead of ah ooh, he'd get the ah ooh and he'd giggle because it sounds so funny in
Right.
your head and it feels so funny, like all the vibrations shift all of a sudden and it feels like the shape of your voice just jumped and did a backflip. And as we worked on this, the range started growing because he wasn't tracking up that open timbre as much, because when the voice drops down to, like, when your speaking voice drops down to G2, when you say an ah vowel, your first forman's going to be around the 7th harmonic. So that's a very open timbre, and the subconscious speech motor control likes to keep everything the same. And so as you start singing up in pitch, it starts trying to track the 7th harmonic, not even the 2nd, and it gets into a really bad place super fast, and it cuts out the range after about an octave. But using these simple acoustic patterns, these ah ooh, and learning how to go into that close timbre, within a few weeks, we'd already extended that range up above middle C and up to D4. And it was starting to, that larynx tracking was starting to let go. So, and, I used simple like patterns of speech and vowel combinations. I knew where they would lead him, and using Voce Vista as well, so that he could see when that timbre shift happened and associate with that with exactly what he was feeling and hearing in his own instrument. And it's amazing how fast, you know, these young middle school age students can pick these ideas up if it's clear to them what it does, what it feels like, what it sounds like, and they can feel the progress.
And let me just tag on to that, because what happens is, you know, if the larynx starts at the second vertebrae as a baby, and then at about age 10, it's at about, you have a 180-degree angle, which is no angle at all as a baby. Then it goes to about 110 through childhood. Then it's at about a 90-degree angle going, you know, from the mouth down into the pharynx. And so it's a huge change, and it goes down to about the seventh vertebrae as the neck lengthens and it widens too, and the tongue is developing, all these things, and they don't all happen in an order. They happen out of order, and so it's really weird. And but I have experimented a lot with Chadley's weird exercise, and especially with even at the college level, even at my level, but at the college level, it does. Introducing the idea of acoustics to a person younger is, I think, going to be a transformative way to work with children and with middle school singers. And it's something we need to get that information to more of our middle school teachers too. So Chadley and I are going to present together at ACDA this February about the adolescent voice. So I think it's going to be really cool.
I'd say one more thing on one of the important parts of introducing acoustics and using it as a tool for teachers of young singers is I would introduce, like, working with Voce Vista to all of my young students, and not only would they start to see, like, oh, that's what resonant voice looks like, you just use it as a strength meter, like, here, if you have lots of harmonics and it feels really easy, great. That's one of our targets. That's one of our goals. And then for me as the teacher, I could start to see, oh, that's what resonant voice sounds like in a 13-year-old.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Just because it doesn't sound like a chiaroscuro baritone doesn't mean it isn't acoustically powerful. Even if it sounds like, oh, that sounds like an adolescent, but oh my gosh, they're giving off a lot of acoustic energy. And then I think about it like, oh yeah, their voice is really clear. It sounds really clean. There's a lot of stuff to work with here. So I think that's really important for understanding the timbres that you're hearing when you're working with adolescent singers and being able to create like a functional resonant voice in an adolescent singer.
And I wish, in addition to that we had models that showed the vocal tract as a child, the vocal tract as an adolescent, the vocal tract as an adult, and the vocal tract as an older person. You know, all of our vocal pedagogy classes teach us one look of how the vocal folds look. That's not how they look as a child. And they are changing even in the middle school kind of time. And as a baby, they're completely different, you know, and the just how you look in your face, how your maxilla and your mandible change, and they keep changing until you're old. And it's amazing. So Chadley, well, you're the best.
You are the best, Chadley. Thank you for popping on tonight. Unexpected.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chadley.
We'll see you in spring as well on a NATS chat with you, Kari.
My pleasure. It was an honor to work with Karen on this project together. Thank you.
Oh, I think I learned more from you. So
thank you.
Such a great contribution to the book. It really is. So let's return, or let's stay actually with the adolescent voice. There's two things I want to go through. The first, as I mentioned to you earlier, is so interesting to me. The survey in 1895 by, I think I'm saying the names right, Benke, who was a voice teacher, and then Brown, who was a surgeon, 1895. And they believe that you should not be singing through the changing voice, as I recall. But they did a survey of 4,200 answers came in. So would you share a little bit about that, Karen?
Well, it's a book called The Child's Voice. I remember going into Steve Austin's office once when I was at University of Northern Texas, and he had the book, and I thought, I really like this guy, you know, and you know, going all the way back and learning about this stuff. But so I have a copy of the Child's Voice, and it's a brown book, and it's not very it's very short, but it's a lot of the answers that they collected, and all they did was they sent out circulars to about 800 people with questions on it about it, and that's how they did their research then. It was opinions, really, and they would say it in beautiful their beautiful rhetoric and of the English language, because it was done in England. And one of the fun things about one person who replied, it was about, they said that they were referring to the post-puberty time as afterlife. And I thought that was amazing. It's like, we call that something quite different to us now. So the languages that they talked about, how things are in voice are different going back. That's an interesting thing in and of itself too, of how we have evolved to where we are now and what we can do now with the 3D imaging of things too.
Do you
So,
think that resource contributed to people's understanding that or thinking, misinformed thinking that we shouldn't be working with the child voice? I mean, do you think it contributed to it?
I think that was the trend then. And I think that's something we can watch for are we going with trends, or are we going with the real information that we have, which is a lot different than what they had. You know, we do need to do more research on changing voices and how different they are one from another, and is there an order that things happen in as far as the growth of the vocal tract. We know there's an order that happens within how the vocal folds change themselves in the lamina propria and the thyroarytenoid, but we can go further with all of those things. And frankly, we don't have recordings of one person's singing voice from birth through very old age. And that will be this next generation that will have that, you know. But wouldn't it be cool to have a person from their birth cry to my oldest one that I have is 103. And it's, you know, and you can measure then, you know, measuring the fundamentals, the formants and all that can tell us a lot about the shape of the vocal tract and how it's gotten longer, or if it's gotten wider. And for instance, your velum, or the uvula, the velum, that whole flap, that continues to grow like your nose does and like your ears do through your whole life. So that's kind of interesting.
It is interesting. And one last question, you've answered it a bit, but let's ask it specifically about what's called the glottal chink. We hear a lot about that in the teenage girls, and work, as you know, with a medical team. And when I send people to be scoped, they'll say, oh, she definitely has a posterior gap, but it's within the norm. So why is it in particular that young girls 12 to 18 and sometimes beyond have this posterior gap referred to as a glottal chink?
Well, it's an absolutely normal neural muscular adaptation, growth, development that is going to take place. Too often, they will either press them together too hard or go nasal to compensate for that. And that's kind of hard to undo. And I've experienced that with a couple certain singers who were very, very loud during that time in their lives and blew their voices out, and then had problems with the vocal folds and used compensatory things to sing nonetheless. And now we face those, you know, when we have them in our college studios or afterwards too. That was something that they had to work on. So we have to have good ears. Cooksey said it very well, John Cooksey. He suggests through this whole time, follow the core of the voice. And when there are those short, he said, except there's short times when there's maybe a gap in the ability to sing clear, or a gap, a mutational chink that causes it to be a little bit breathy. Those are normal. Watch them. If it goes past a certain age, it's not normal. You know, so that's the important thing for us to know.
We have a question with Kari Wilson, and I encourage you as we head to the last 15 minutes to please ask some questions of Karen. Kari would like to take us into aging voice, which is great. We haven't gotten there yet tonight. She has a class of students over 55, men and women. She doesn't ask a specific question, but maybe she just wants you to speak to that age group and older.
And feel free to type an answer if you want to ask a specific thing. Well, I'm older, and I can tell you everything has changed. For women, as we go through menopause, we have a sudden change, whether you go through that naturally or whether you have a surgical menopause. Um, the hormones drop off, and therefore you can have swelling of the vocal folds, or they get too slack. I have lost range. I used to have I could sing up to a high F above a high C, had a really good high C, and it went down a lot after that. There are choices about taking hormones that you have to make. I chose 2 for a while and then went off it because of the scares they were saying about Prempro, about taking Premarin and progesterone at the same time. And so I'm just going a la naturala. So that way, for women, so it's a pretty sudden hormonal stop. For men, it is a slow, progressive change. And by sometime in the 20s, men start, their testosterone goes down about 1% a year until they hit 60, around there, and then it gets a little faster until 70. So we typically see women's voices go down and men's voices go up.
Mhm.
As for men, testosterone is less of an influence, and for women, it's estrogen and progesterone are less of an influence. The changes, I see a lot of situations with older singers who come in, and it's tough because, especially if you were a good singer, then you're wondering what happened because you're trying like heck, and really you're probably compensating, and your muscles have gotten weaker. You might have another gap. For women, men can too, but a lot of those things you have to actually address a little more mindfully. And so, for instance, I do something, I love the V. I love to use the V, which is very semi-occlusive vocal tract. That kind of work is very helpful throughout your lives, but you might want to really hit on it now. And so I like that a lot because it exercises the muscles of support a lot. And they need a little bit more of that. And muscles that aren't fully in shape, you can feel them. So you might notice you're breathing more as an older person. And if you keep trying to do it, like there's a lot of language about just let it go, let it be natural, just relax everything. Well, it's pretty specific what you need to relax in singing. You don't want to, because you're not supporting, then compensate, around the larynx itself.
Mhm.
The laryngeal position can change. It can drop a bit. But if you weren't very good at keeping it down before, it might be pretty stubborn and want to go really higher than usual. I like to use the tongue exercise. I use, and these are in the book too, I use giggity, gaggity, giggity, gaggity, goo. And it's just giggity, gaggity, giggity, gaggity, goo. And that helps you not to over open your mouth. That's another typical thing that older singers are going to do is giggity, gaggity, gaggity. No, that's not going to work. Giggity, 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 goo, which gives credibility to the fact that the pharynx can do more than it could do, for instance, as a child, and then through puberty as it's trying to do and suddenly can, and then it's confusing to that. But now we have to think back there a little more, think of the smile in the back, think of the yawn, think of the hi, how are you kind of thing, and be a little more purposeful with that. And with that, you'll probably see the cheeks go up more, and trying just a little more effort towards that. And I've seen it work every time. Being more mindful with the support muscles, more mindful about the opening in the back, and really be insistent on the good onset, good offset. H's are that's not vibration. So start with a good vibration. Creaking can be helpful. It draws the vocal folds together. It also relaxes the larynx a bit. I've seen that be very helpful as well.
Very good. Great information. Dana Lentini says, amazing book. I really enjoyed it. Couldn't put it down. Thank you. And yes, we do need more research on the prepubescent voice. Could you talk a little bit about the concept of non-linear and sensation-based vocal methods?
Having to do with puberty, I assume, or in general.
Yes.
Okay, say that at nonlinear and sensation-based.
Nonlinear and sensation-based vocal methods.
So I'm in favor of using sensations. As we get older, we lose some of that because those sensations are sort of a combination of what you hear around your ear outside it, but also inside your head. And sometimes as you get older, there's hearing loss, and that might be one reason you have trouble keeping that going. As a young person going through puberty, you haven't probably paid much attention to your sensations so much. And so that's very, very changing. And that really needs a teacher to help map you through that time. As a young adult, in the college age, for instance, we're really dealing with, I definitely tell people I tell people when we talk about the acoustics, do you sense it behind you? And that's, and they should in the classical singing is what we're talking about. That's not necessarily the case in CCM, and the sensations will be different. But the sensations of hearing your own acoustic back there really can help, and then feeding into that is very helpful. And the first part of that was what? The sensations was the second.
Non-linear.
Non-linear does that have to do with growth or development?
Yeah, Dana, if you can quickly type something, a concept of about the concept of non-linear and sensation-based vocal methods. So we'll see if she.
Well, I can, as far as not, we'll see what she says, but here's a good example of how things change. So I had a 17-year-old young man come to me last week who has been in a boy choir, male choir, and was a treble voice in the male choir. And then he wanted to become a countertenor. So he was supporting the way he would have as a child, and he was also said all the right lingo. You know, he used forward placement in the mask. He used a linear kind of feeling. And I said, where are you thinking of the linear thing? And he said, and he showed me in the front of his mouth right here. I said, well, I can see that sort of in an empirical kind of way. But what if, and I had just talked to him about opening the back of the throat, and I have them do this thing, I call it, Mignon Dunn taught it to me, it's the pharyngeal stretch. And you just first, if you go, nothing happens. But when you go, and you open the back, it overstretches it, but then you sing after that and it remembers just enough. And so we had done that. And I said, what if instead of thinking tall here, you thought tall back here? By going like that, like, hi, how are you? And he did that, and he actually had tears because it woke up some acoustics, as Chadley was talking about, that he had not experienced. And usually when we experience something like that that feels so right, he couldn't have experienced those as a child because the growth of the mouth, for instance, the mouth of a child is like this and the back is real small. When you go through puberty, then the back starts growing and the front doesn't grow so much. And that would be an example of nonlinear growth.
Okay.
Another example would be like your legs and your arms grow really long at first, and then your torso grows long later.
Okay, and I think that she was saying that you talked about, oh, here, hang on, sorry.
Okay.
In the Senescent Singer chapter, you talk about nonlinear models. I was wondering how you relate that to sensation-based.
Yeah, it'd be the same in older voices that their jaw, for instance, starts to, you have resorption is going on all the time, but when you're an older person, instead of getting new tissues in the skeleton, for instance, let's talk about the mandible. You don't get new creation of tissues. Instead, you have them not doing that, and they get smaller. Your jaw, and it changes shape. It starts to jet out a little bit more. I have a little bit more of a little old lady's chin here now, and there's a real graphic picture in the book that shows a young lady in her 30s, and then a skeletal picture of just her face, and then a picture of an older person. And that really shows. I'm going to find it. Here it is. I'm just going to put it up here just so you can see it. Do the opposite. There we go.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
There you go. You can see in the top that that's
Mhm.
how the mandible looks, and you can see how even the eye sockets look to be bigger, and the jaw looks like it's deteriorated. So
Very interesting. Gosh, we're just down to a minute, but I do want to. Sandra McLean asks a simple, can you demonstrate creaking?
just going, or sometimes I have them go, wow, or you can do it on hum too. It's
Okay.
amazing what that can do for people. And that's something used in the voice clinic by SLPs. So.
Yeah, of course. All right. So as we close it here, Karen, I'm getting a message that you do a great Julia Childs.
Oh, thank you. Yes, and I know that came from Edry, who does a great Julia Andrews. So
She
yeah,
does.
hi
I agree.
Edry.
Yes, and that is who asked. She asked me not to tell.
Edry.
Do it great. And one last thing, because Kate Baker has asked a couple times, yes, you've been caught, Edry, that for her, that her voice, she's not noticing it change in her mid to late 50s. And so just, I think, looking for confirmation from you that it would be individual. I would also say genre-based.
Oh, well, I don't know. It's I don't know. Well, I don't know, but it is individual for sure, and it's
Yeah.
based on so many things. Your DNA, look at your parents. What did they go through? One picture does not fit everybody, and that is definitely one of the biggest takeaways of menopause. Is there is not one way to do it. There's even research about that. That is the one thing they can say is it's variable from man to man and from woman to woman.
Wonderful. And so one person says you're the creaking is the same as vocal fry.
Yeah,
that's what it sounded like to me. Yes. Okay. Good. Well, we hit the most of the main questions. So Karen, this hour went way too fast. Thank you so much for all the information, and really congratulations on this incredible book.
Well, thanks a lot. And this says how great it is to be a member of NATS, and so many of the people in the book are members of NATS, and what I've learned from everybody, Chadley and Aaron Johnson, it's just unbelievable. So we have a lot of great things coming up too, and so be watching for that. Very excited about what's happening. So thanks for listening, everyone.
Would you like to plug anything specifically upcoming for NATS?
Well, we just sent out a message to all of our members announcing that we are going to be looking at a capital campaign along with the Voice Foundation, the NATS Voice Foundation. And so look for more for that as things develop, and that's definitely developing. There is a new webpage about international initiatives, and myself and Scott Swope and Alan Henderson are going to be taking hopefully about 50 NATS members to Germany, and we're going to be talking to doctors who are specialists in pediatrics about the voice, to CCM, to jazz, to the Charité, the head of the Charité otolaryngology. There's, I think, about 8 or 9 people that we'll get to do, and we're going to be going to the to Leipzig, to the Bach Fest, and get to talk to some of the people that teach there as well, and some of the experts in the Bach music as well. And watch for advocacy. We've had meetings with them, and tomorrow morning I'm meeting about national student auditions, and going to be meeting about membership. So we're kicking hard here and loving it. Thanks for everything everybody does. It's great.
Thank you for being the leader of that currently. Let me just, as we end this evening, thank everybody for joining us. And please remember our next NATS chat, please pre-register. It's November 11th. And the Independent Studio panel has been so popular that we're doing number 3 with Cynthia Vaughn and myself leading the helm. And Kelly Barham and Kristen Coffey-Rondeau, I hope I'm saying those names right, will be joining us, and it's going to be finding and keeping Finding them and keeping them, studio, marketing, and retention. So that's November 11th. So it should be another good independent studio chat. So once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Inside View Press. And thank you, Karen, so much for your time tonight.
Thanks, Kari. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great evening.